Well, hi there, Rex.
Hi, Christiana.
Welcome. I know we're here today to learn a little bit about you, Rex Lassalle, and we're coming together because you are working in the process right now of building a new online community that you're going to be introducing to the world in the new year. And part of the process of you bringing this community, which is called Orinoco Flows, is you're going to have a 5-part series that you're doing starting up in November through the middle of December. And you're introducing 5 different women, I believe. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Who have had profound experiences with this new healing modality that you've been experimenting with essentially for the last 40 years. If I remember correctly. So 4 decades.
That is correct. Mhm.
Okay. Well, and I'm just curious because we want to tell our listeners what it is that you have discovered, but first, how you kind of came about discovering it. So I'm just curious. You are a homeopath, an osteopath.
Osteopath. Did study homeopathy, but I wouldn't call myself a homeopath, but I know about it. But I did osteopathy and qualified as an osteopath. And I also studied Oriental medicine, acupuncture, and then I ran classes of shiatsu at the East West Center in London in the 1970s. And yes, so those are my beginnings.
Powerful beginnings too, because you've created schools and you've been a teacher for a number of years now. And this is an interesting part of your work, how you've integrated Japanese wisdom teachings and how you discovered what is the Nine Star Ki Astrology system. So how did you find this Nine Star Ki, and how is it part of the Orinoco Flows community that you're creating?
Thank you,
No
Christiana.
small question.
Okay, in the 1970s, well, let me be kind of, because people Google and whatever. So after coming out of prison, I was involved with the army. I took the army over. There was a mutiny. And anyway, I went to prison. And then certain experiences happened there. And I knew um, my life was more about healing and self-awareness and self-discovery. So that then, plus also my parents, my father especially told me, Rex, it's time for you to leave Trinidad. And so I was doing a correspondence course with a school in Dublin, Ireland, Swedish School of Physical Culture, with a gentleman by the name of Eric Peters. So when I was in prison, I started that program. Um, so when I came out of prison, I went to Ireland, and that's where I started my healing journey, really. And whilst there in Ireland, there was a shop called Green Acres. This was in Dublin, and it was run by a gentleman named Tony Harnett. He created Bread and Circus in Boston, which is about the macrobiotic community. And in that shop, this would have been 1973. I saw a book by Michio Kushi about Nine Star Ki Astrology. And I was curious. I didn't believe what I was reading in it. I just thought that's historical and, it's not relevant in modern life. And so that was where it began. That was my first sort of connection with Nine Star Ki Astrology.
Wow. Okay. So this line following you out of prison, which I'm sure everybody's ears peaked with that one. And you mentioned people can Google so that we can learn, they
Yeah,
can
yeah,
learn
of
more
course. I
about
mean, they
your
would see
mutiny.
that rather than he never mentioned that in the interview. I mentioned it because when they put my name down, they will see that. So it's like, hey, it's nothing about, hiding that away. It's just that's the reality. So yeah.
Oh no, well, it's the first thing that pops up for Wikipedia on Rex
Exactly, yes,
Lassalle.
yes.
And that's exactly why we're here today, though, is to deepen more into this 9 Star Ki and the Orinoco flows. So, okay, we know how you found the 9 Star Ki. What is the 9 Star Ki and how is it tied to this child star number?
Okay, thank you, Christiana. The 9 Star Ki, before I go there, in fact, I think there's something that precedes that, which is very important. Both my parents had the capacity to read signs. They were senior civil servants, spoke fluently the Queen's English, all of that, but they had a capacity of if they saw certain things like a bird whistled or they saw some plant, blooming at a certain time, which was unexpected, they could make statements about it, which more or less manifested within 24 hours. This was consistently there in my life. It was at 100% accuracy all the time. And of course, as a child growing up, so like my mother would say to me, Rex, we're going to get visitors. So I said, why you would say that, Mom? And she would say, look, the grasshopper, somebody's coming, we'll get somebody unexpected is going to come tomorrow. And it would happen. And my father had the capacity with different things. In fact, to go back to the prison experience, the year when that happened, that Old Year's night into New Year's morning, a hawk flew over our home. I wasn't there at the time, and my father heard it, and he spoke to my mother and said, listen, somebody in this house have a big problem this year. Maybe they may even die. This is what he said, which was the year of when the mutiny happened and all of that. So I grew up with this level of accuracy about reading the signs.
Yeah.
And it was the only thing that was at 100% accuracy in my life. My education in school was okay, but it was never at 100%. Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst was never at 100% with what was thing, but this was at 100%. I didn't realize it at the time, but as time goes on, so I had this in my background. So when I came upon the 9 Star Ki Astrology, I was looking at it with the information, but also wondering what signs are there with this. At the beginning, it didn't click. I didn't have that. Plus, I was distant from it in the sense of, historically, this is kind of quite accurate. This may be interesting, but not like for modern life, not at all. So let me start there with that, making that statement. Maybe you want to say something from that, because, of course I can continue, but I just think rather than holding all of that time talking on my side, it's good for you also to say or ask.
No, you're guiding us well, because you're letting us know that the 9 Star Ki does hold signs. And what we haven't explained to a lot of our listeners is it's tied into the Oriental, the 5-element principle theory, right? And what are some of the signs of the 9 Star Ki and how is it tied to the elements?
So this is more towards the end about how it reaches there, but there's a story as regards when my aha moment happened with it, when I realized this is relevant in modern life. So what happened was that Mountbatten was assassinated in Ireland. And I didn't see that coming. Of course, I knew who he was. He would have enemies and people against him from the colonial period. But I didn't sense this was something brewing for him. So when I checked, because in the 9 Star Ki Astrology, there's a whole aspect of directionology, which directions you're traveling and what, the dangers or how smooth it would be. So when I checked Mountbatten's birth date, and when I checked the month and all of that, he went into what was called like a triple whammy in the sense of it's dangerous at all sorts of levels. So when I saw that, I said, wow, this is still relevant. So that is when I then started to collect information from clients, students. I would always ask them their birth date. I had the calendar and I would know which element their adult star was, which was from the year in which they were born. And then I would know from the month in which they were born, their child star. So this is how my initiation about Rex, dive into this. This has a lot of juice in it. So this is what happened. It was from that experience.
Well, and I've experienced this with you working with my own clients and collecting their birth date. And you pull out more information through questions. Like you'll ask me, well, what was going on for this person in this month and time? And so I know that you're referring to the Nine Star Ki and the months and looking at what element and what was aligned for them in the astrology at that time. And sure enough, like one client we had, it's like, oh, well, she had pneumonia that month. And you're like, oh yes, this was the month of lungs and this was interacting with this element. And it's really amazing to me at how much you can access about information about a person's health just by looking at these charts that you're referring to. But what was amazing to me and drew me in from the beginning was the star child number. And I mean, that's really what started the whole Orinoco flows, is this child star number. And I'm getting ahead of myself for the listeners, but just to spill a little bit more information that you can delve deeper into, is I know that a lot of us carry a child star, well, we all have a child star, but that it's wounded, or that it's had certain, we've had certain trauma that we carry with us in this world and day and age. And that if we know what our child star number is and the core element that feeds it, we can actually repair a lot of pain and suffering that we're experiencing in our life just through tapping into the knowledge of what our child star number is. So what you mentioned, the child star number is our time in the month of the year that we were born. But really, can you tell us a little bit more what the child star number is and how it ties to elements?
Sure. Although we're speaking about numbers, it's the Nine Star Ki system is not a numerological system. And the Orientals have a way of at times using a caption pointing to something, but it's just a stepping stone rather than it has to do with that per se. So I just want to kind of clarify that in some people's minds, because sometimes people can think because they're hearing numbers, it's a numerological system. It isn't. So it's really based on the 5 elements. And in that system, they speak about the water nourishing the wood being used to create the fire. The fire, from that, you have the whole aspect of the ashes, which is the earth. The earth, from that, in that sense of things hardening or things confirming, you get into the metal, and you have this sequence of events, of a flow of energy. So that aspect is there. It's there in the acupuncture. It is there in the Oriental herbal remedies. It's there in the I Ching. So it's the dominant factor in Eastern cultures. Well, let's put it China, Japan, Korea, those cultures. India has something a little bit different, but anyhow. So that is where it comes from. Now, the aspect about the star, your child's star, this is not Rex Lassalle talking. This exists already in nearly all indigenous cultures. They mention at birth, in fact, many psychic and sensitive midwives, they see a spiral, a vortex of energy around that time when the birth is happening, which is connecting to that baby. So this has been known. It's not something like just came up on my side. So that has been there. And in fact, if you read any of the indigenous cultures and you get into some of the midwifery, you would see that they talk about that quite openly. It's like, this is what goes on. Okay. What I have observed, so over the 4 decades, because this has been like work in progress, I have observed that the child star is where the emotional needs of our being resides.
The emotional needs of
our being resides. It resides there. So in nourishing, doing things that nourish that element, that nourishes, like, okay, so for example, like somebody who is a 6 metal or 7 metal, the metal has a lot to do with the lungs, and it has a lot to do with the skin. So the kinesthetic aspect of somebody who has a 6 metal child or 7 metal child is the kinesthetic quality of their life is very important. The type, how the clothes feel next to their skin. When they walk into a room, the atmosphere of what they feel. These are levels of messages that are just there for them. And when they cultivate or have a receptivity and a relatedness to it, it's like it just opens doors for them. And the level of intuition, they just know, you know what, I need to do this or I need to do that. So in handling stress, nourishing your child star allows you to have a feel-good quality dealing with your stress, because you are sort of honoring a deep part of yourself emotionally. Christiana, I think I have to slow down because I'm getting sort of carried away, carried in this, but that is what it is about. Okay.
you and I both in this whole relatedness around this project. Orinoco flows. We both know that there's this passion, this potency in this river of life, right? This flow of energy that's really it's swept us up. So I love your passion and how you speak, because it's so deep. We could speak for hours. But I love what you brought in about this element of the spirals, how the midwives and the doulas could see this aspect. And I don't know if you caught my mistake earlier, but I called it the star child number. And of course, in your work, you refer to it as the child star number. And maybe that wasn't such a mistake on my part, because we've talked about this, like, children coming from the stars or the cosmos, right? This web that is the vast source of life, but literally like coming down from the star energy. So it's funny how I flip those words. But this is very important for what you're introducing in this 5-part series that's coming in November, is this element that you just mentioned on the doulas, midwives. This community of Orinoco flows is for women.
Sure.
And you intentionally wanted it to be for women. And I want to hear more about that. Why do you want to service women with the knowledge of the 9 Star Ki and this feel-good sensation that you can help give them or provide them through a learning space of the Orinoco flows? Like, tell me more. Why the women?
Okay. Christiana, I think we need to say how the name Orinoco flows came about. So you can mention that, and then I will explain. It will flow from that quite in a very straightforward, obvious way of the signs, in the sense of it's being acknowledged already in the name. So you share with our listeners what went on.
Well, this will be perfect, because this will be the way to like sum up our talk today and get them into the Orinoco. Well, first we have to mention that you and I came together through an acquaintance, Sarah Devoy, and she's a craniosacral therapist in Ireland. And she's been on, along your path for some years now. And she and I met through the pre and perinatal psychology world. And we're wanting to come together to help women with birth, right? And right now we realize that there's a lot that's broken in this world around birth and what's going on with our children. So we all had this commonality together, and we were on this mission to find a name for this community that you've dreamt of and you're wanting to build. And there I was sitting at night reading, and I'm trying to think of, a good name. And I come across this blog. A Japanese woman had written about a ceremony, a water ceremony that she had done, a ritual to honor her lost child, because she had a miscarriage. And she had, extreme grief. And I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden, the name Inya, one of my favorite song producers from my childhood and through all these years, I knew that there was a song that she had written that I really loved, but I couldn't name it. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it came to me then. And then you and I had a meeting the next morning, and I mentioned it again. I said, there's something around Inya and a song. And I looked it up, and it was Orinoco Flow. And I remember saying, oh, there it is, Rex. It's Orinoco Flow. Do you know Inya? And you said, come again? Orinoco? And I had no idea what Orinoco was, or where that it's actually a river in Venezuela. And there it was, the connection to your family, your ancestral line. So maybe that's where you can take over the significance of Orinoco to you.
So when Christiana, well, my voice has changed. When Christiana mentioned Orinoco Flow in our chat, I'm going to surprise people. I did this because it's like, what? So Christiana had to repeat it. I said, but, that is where my father's mother comes from. Mm-hmm. She was an indigenous woman from Venezuela, from the Orinoco Basin. And she has been an unseen part of my life in a very powerful and strong way, because the day before I left prison, came out of prison, because we had no dates of when we would leave prison. The government was just, how that was with the mutiny and all that. Blood came out from my left chest, my left nipple. I didn't know that at the time, but that had the connection with my father's mother, because certain things happened later on, which is in my audiobook about my life that I shared. So when you said that, it was just like, okay, she wants this to go on. And besides that, my mother's mother, who had 13 children, and who really am the son of my grandmother, because that's another story about my mother, but it was all happy. Do not hear it like it wasn't happy. It was very happy. But she looked after my mother and cooked every day for my mother when my mother was pregnant with me. So that sort of nourishing quality has been around me, and that caring quality. Plus the aspect about women, like my mother and my granny, like whatever they say, I did. I mean, it was just like orders. I mean, in the audiobook about myself, you can hear that, with my mother doing cane road with my hair. Anyway, I don't want to digress into that. So that is how the name came about, which is really that aspect about nourishing, which is that aspect about the whole experience of birth. Yes, I am a man, but I know about it in a way, because in the birth experience, we're dealing with water, and yes, the water breaks, and that starts the process with the whole, with the contraction and whatever. So we are connecting with water, we're connecting with the emotions. And this is such a big part of the whole birth experience and the whole healing aspect of water. And Orinoco Flows is bringing that healing quality just by its name.
Just by its name. And well, and that sums up exactly what we're trying to do. And that this space that you're creating is a community for women, that they can come together, they can deepen more into the unknown part of themselves, the subconscious mind, using this model of the 9 star key. Just by knowing their adult star number and their child star number. And this element that we haven't mentioned on the call today about rituals, rituals that they can engage with in their lives, their everyday life, that can bring about this connection to their core emotional needs, or this core element that's at the root of their child star number. And they can use it to relate to their children. And that was one of the things that was one of the most beautiful gifts that I've had through this whole experience, is you tapping into my son's child star number. And we went through this big move. We moved a number of states away from where we lived, and we've started over, and lots of new beginnings, lots of transition for my son, who was a C-section baby. And transition is hard for him. There's not a lot of choice in the C-section birth on the baby's part, right? So there's been a lot of emotion and anger and turmoil, and you tapped right into that using his child star number and what his emotional needs are. And we built a ritual that we did with him in the space. It was just, if there is any a testimony to magic and what happens when you relate to space and you open up using this modality, right? It was profound what we experienced and the shift that happened in my son. And I know that's exactly what we're here to do in November and December, is to bring women to the forefront so we can hear their story. And you have 5 women lined up, and each one has a very unique story, and how you use the 9 star key and their child star number and rituals that they engaged with, and they experienced healing. So I can't wait. There's more information, and I know with the little bio, the description that we put together for the YouTube video here below, you can get more more details on what is to come for the Orinoco flows. And you can also click on the link, and it will take you to our websites that will give you more information about the conversations to be had. But Rex, is there anything that you want to add at this moment in time?
Sure. I just want to say one more thing. In speaking about rituals, it can be very simple. And I mentioned this to all of you now listening to what we're chatting about. It can be as simple as having a shower. You start having your relationship with the water as one of a companion. So you start building a relatedness with water. That changes the shower you have, or that changes the bath that you have. That's a different experience. And it's just coming from that attitude of, rather than water just being a functional aspect that cleans my clothes or washes my dishes, or I just have a shower and clean myself, start building a relatedness with it, whereby you start experiencing it as a companion. Something changes in that whole experience, which is an everyday choice that we have. And that is, the water aspect, we all came out of water. So that is, and it's 70% of our being, the blood, which is like the water. So I just share that. I mean, that can do a lot for people. And there's a lot of information about that, about water. There's a Japanese professor who passed on, I think his Emoto is his name or whatever, and the photos about the energy from water. So yes, so thank you very much, Christian.
The sacred geometry that comes from how what was put in the space, right? Whether it was harmonious language or disharmonious, and it would change the water crystals. I know who
Exactly.
you're speaking, and it would make these beautiful, beautiful patterns. Well, and you spoke to that. It doesn't just have to be water, right? It can be any of the elements that's at your core. And you mentioned 6 metal and 7 metal child star earlier. And, I'm a 6 metal child star, and I developed a relatedness to my skin. You mentioned how skin is very important, skin and lungs to metal star children, but there I said it again, star children.
No, that's allowed.
It's fine. It's funny
No,
that
no,
it
no, no.
showing up that
It's
way.
accurate. It's accurate.
But my healing journey started with becoming a craniosacral therapist, and hands-on, and being able to sense, using my skin as a sensory mechanism to tune into, the tides, as we call it in craniosacral therapy, or the movement of the cerebral spinal fluid, the blood, the water. And it changed my life, right? Like it was a profound healing experience just by coming in relationship in that way with my skin, which again was tapped into my child star number as a 6 metal child star. So that leaves me with a lot more questions, but I know we have just a short time together, and I hope that it's brought up a lot of questions for everyone listening now and in the future. And again, we want to pique your interest because we want to welcome, women to this community of Orinoco flows and experience this healing for themselves. So thank you, Rex.
Thank you very much.